And we're really looking forward to this workshop, and pleased to be with you all today.
Asante sana, Nigel. It is a pleasure having you in this session. Naile Jileji, tafadhali, introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Naile Jileji Tipo, and I work with Indigenous Forum in the Gender Department. Thank you.
Asante. Paine, tafadhali.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, you can't see my face. I have video issues, but maybe along the way you'll see my face. My name is Paine. I work with Jamaa Community Resource Team. Thank you.
Thank you, Paine. I hope we will be able to see your face later. I'll save Richard baadaye kidogo. Tafadhali, Saitoti, karibu. Saitoti, you are heard from very far. Could you please? Sauti kidogo iongezwe. I may ask you to write us in the chat, to write us in the messages, the introduction, since we haven't been able to hear you properly. Sauti imekuwa ndogo. But Scholar Joseph, and then Veronica.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Scholar Joseph. I work with Maasai Women Development Organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Scholar. Veronica?
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Veronica Gonzalez, and I am an independent consultant. I'm happy to be with you all here today. Thank you.
Asante. Richard, kwa maneno mawili tu, lakini kwenye presentation yako, you may be able to introduce yourself properly. I understand this few seconds might not be enough, but just to hear about you. Karibu, Richard.
Asante sana. My name is Richard Muyungi, Dr. Richard Muyungi, actually. I am from Tanzania. I'm a long-term participant in global climate change issues, and maybe later I'll introduce more about what I do. Thank you so much.
Definitely, you shall introduce yourself about what you do more.
We can't hear you, Chancellor.
Apparently, I was speaking to myself. Thank you. So I would like to welcome you, Mr. Porokwa, on behalf of Pingos Forum, to give us the word of the welcome remarks, please.
Asante sana. My name is Edward Porokwa, and I'm an executive director of Pingos Forum. And probably we will have more interaction during the course of discussion. But just suffice to say that you are all welcome to this very important event on trying to understand issues of climate change in Africa in relation to indigenous knowledge. It is a very interesting and important subject for indigenous people, but also it is a very important thing that play a very important part in the climate change adaptation and mitigation. So I would be very interested to hear the presentation from Dr. Muyungi, from everybody else. And this is a very important session to us engaging on issues of climate change, but also where we try to address issues of indigenous people in the context of the very fast changing environment where we all have to adapt or we have to mitigate the impact of climate change in our communities. I don't have much to say, but we are all welcome. I'm happy to see some of the people that I don't see often, including Dr. Richard Muyungi, Nigel. I've also seen my friend Hindu, and many others from outside the country. And I'm very happy to interact with you and try to see how we can do together to address issues that affect our community, which is really why we are here. It is trying to see to it that we make a difference in our community, and we try to address issues of climate change, which are cross-cutting in our livelihood, and which really have a lot of impact in the policies and in the way we work together. Thank you very much, Chancellor. I don't have to waste a lot of time on this, and I hope we will have a very fruitful discussion, and probably we might have way to work together toward the objective of addressing issues of indigenous people and climate change. Asante sana Chancellor, asanteni wote, karibuni sana. Na I'm sorry, I'm speaking in Kiswahili. I'm leaving Hindu and Veronica out, but we'll try as much as possible to use English, because most of us can meet through that language. So asanteni sana na karibuni sana kwenye platform hii.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Edward. Ashe Olen, Edward, so to say. I won't waste further time. I'd like to welcome Dr. Richard Muyungi. I understand when we last met was in Arusha, but prior to that was in Bonn, and there's still a lot, and every time I meet this person, there's still a lot I learn. He is like kisima kisichokauka, a well that never dries. So I'm really grateful for your time right now. And please, I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Muyungi, for your session right now on the indigenous knowledge relevance for adaptation policies in Africa. Daktari, this is your moment also. We have to know you well. For those who don't know, who is Dr. Richard Muyungi, a long-term partner in issues of climate change. Please, karibu sana, Doctor. And we are expecting more people to be joining us. Asante.
Okay, asante sana. Thank you very much, Edward, colleagues. Indeed, it's always a pleasure to get an opportunity to talk to colleagues across Africa. I'm very excited to also note that Hindu, my long-term colleague, she's also in. So I'll restrain myself from focusing on Swahili so that I can always bring her on board. But otherwise, colleagues, let me first sincerely thank you for giving me the honor to speak on this very important topic. It's a very important topic for Africa, and I think in the course of your deliberations, certainly we will all learn a lot, and I'm glad that most of the colleagues who will be speaking are from the continent, and they have tremendous knowledge from their perspectives, but also since they were born in Africa, they have lived the indigenous knowledge. So indeed, this is a very important topic, not only globally, but across the continent. And I think in the context of climate change, it is gaining even more importance. Now, as I introduce myself, I'm Richard Muyungi, Dr. Muyungi. I have been in climate change for almost 30 years now, 28 to 30 years. I have participated in all UN processes since 1995. My role has been, frankly speaking, to speak for Africa. I have voiced myself and aligned myself to the continent in terms of their predicaments, the challenges we are facing in the context of climate change, the burdens, the big burdens we have been given to address climate change, even the absence of resources. So I have followed the debate. I have participated in the debate. I have led the debate. I have also tried as much as I can throughout my negotiations to convince everybody that Africa has to get its fair share in terms of adaptation, in terms of means of implementation, etc. I am still working as a part of the African group of negotiators. In fact, I chair what we call the strategic committee of the AGN. Above all, I've also been chairing the many processes in the course of deliberations. I'm the first chair of the Global Adaptation Fund Board. I have also spearheaded the establishment of the LDC Fund in 2001. And presently, I am a member of the Green Climate Fund Board representing Africa. So the topic you are bringing on board, if I may start, let me be very clear, colleagues, that this is a very important topic now as we deliberate the implications of climate change on the continent. I don't want to repeat all what you know, but only to reiterate a few things. First, indigenous knowledge in the context of climate change is one of the areas we are focusing on because we have lately underscored the fact that much as we are using what we call scientific knowledge, indigenous knowledge embedded in our systems, embedded in our culture, embedded in our history, is indeed helping us to shape what best we can do to address climate change, particularly in Africa. And because of that, it's not only elevated in the Climate Change Convention, but as you all know, it is also elevated in the Desertification Convention. And in fact, the discussions on indigenous knowledge gained more ground in the Desertification Convention, which is also very relevant to our discussions in the climate change arena. Fortunately, I also have been the leader of the Tanzanian delegation in the Desertification Convention, as well as the Biodiversity Convention. So I have gained a lot of understanding of how indigenous knowledge not only touches adaptation, but also increases our understanding and our resilience in the context of Biodiversity Convention, as well as in the context of the Desertification Convention. I don't want to go to the history, but the problem we have been facing with indigenous knowledge is that the colonial era defined indigenous knowledge as illogical, unscientific, and in some instances barbaric. And this is where the problem came on board, that we ignored our indigenous knowledge, but because the colonial era, the colonial masters did not want us to bring it up. It's only recently, and if you remember the history of the UN processes in 1997, at the conference in Toronto, the Indigenous Knowledge Conference in Toronto, that's when the whole world came on board and to understand that indigenous knowledge was indeed becoming important. And ever since, we have embedded indigenous knowledge in our discussions, in the UN fora, and many UN fora, and in fact, it is embedded in the SDGs, the 17 SDGs. In each of those areas, when you talk about how to address desertification, how to address climate change, how to ensure that we conserve our biodiversity, how to address the oceans, all these are touching on indigenous knowledge. And in fact, you have focused the discussion here on indigenous knowledge and climate change adaptation. And I can assure you that indigenous knowledge also helps us to mitigate climate change, helps us to understand better how to conserve our biodiversity, helps us to address desertification in Sahelian areas. We have tremendous knowledge on how we can survive in harsh environments in the Sahelian areas, across Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and everywhere. So indigenous knowledge, much as your discussions here is confined on how we can use indigenous knowledge to address climate change adaptation, it's across the board. It's across all our living areas, all areas of our survival. It addresses all areas of our development, how indigenous knowledge can help us to develop as a continent, as a country, as individuals. So indeed, it's more than that. But in terms of adaptation, and I think this is a topic where you are focusing on, let me say that much as we have been looking at the scientific aspects of adaptation, all is guided by indigenous knowledge. Many areas where we believe that adaptation makes sense is basically those areas are areas where indigenous knowledge has been taken on board. whether it's about coming up with technologies which can address our adaptation need in the coastal areas, in landlocked areas. Indigenous knowledge is seen as being embedded in all what we are thinking in terms of scientific, so to say, what we are told by colonial masters, the so-called scientific knowledge. Look at what we are doing in terms of adaptation, the so-called, for example, ecosystem-based adaptation, which is a slogan nowadays. Basically, when you talk about ecosystem-based adaptation, is how you can use indigenous knowledge, which has been there for many, many years, to ensure that we can adapt to the changing climate using our ecosystems, using our knowledge, using the knowledge on how to manage the ecosystems, how to manage nature to ensure that we can survive within the changing climate. Talk about climate change in terms of water. There has never been any knowledge across the world, the so-called scientific knowledge, which does not use indigenous knowledge to identify where even the water can be available. You know, in many countries, including in Tanzania, we're still using indigenous knowledge to trace where water can be available, even without any scientific knowledge. You go to the village, any villager will tell you where you have to get your well dug and where you can get water. Looking at the trees, look about the rainfall patterns. The rainfall patterns, you go to a village, anybody will tell you that in the next few months, we'll get rains. In the next few months, we'll get drought. And this is embedded in their indigenous knowledge. Look at about how we fish in the oceans. It's only indigenous knowledge which tells you where you can get even more fish within a given area. So all this is helping us to adapt. All this is embedded in our knowledge, which has come across many, many years of understanding the systems, understanding the culture, understanding our history, and respecting, of course, what we get from our ancestors. So indeed, adaptation cannot be delinked from indigenous knowledge, and for Africa, the basis of our growth, the basis of our survival in terms of adapting to climate change is indeed embedded in indigenous knowledge. Let me pause here, and if I'll be very more than happy to get questions, interactions, but I thought I should give you this as a starting point in your discussions. Thank you very much.
Asante sana daktari. Tracing back and citing you kwamba these things have been made known like illogical, unscientific, and barbaric, but in essence, they are the roots and mother and solution to so many of the challenges that you're facing. Please, from any member of this session, we can throw in questions or clarifications if anyone needs. Karibuni kwa maswali. But if not, at any moment of time, you may raise your hand. And doctor, so it seems we don't have a question right now, but they may be popping up in the chat box, or someone may happen to raise a hand, and we will be able to alert you.
Asante sana. Of course, my understanding that a keynote address has no questions, but I was thinking if there will be any areas of clarification, I'll be happy to provide. Otherwise, I'll be listening, and it's a pleasure to be part of this meeting, and I wish you all the best, but I'll be part of the listening as we move along. Thank you so much.
Asante sana daktari. Thank you so much, doctor. Without wasting further time, now this is a moment we have to, now the playground is all ours, and with the presence of a doctor and other consultants here, Veronica as well. But Naila Gileji, I think this is your moment to take us through understanding pastoralist women's knowledge as a key resilience element. Tafadhali. Karibu.
Tibab, and I work with Pingos Forum. I'll pass to committed. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Tanzania Tibab, and I work with Pingos Forum. I'll be presenting a very short understanding based on women, Indigenous women with climate change. As doctors just passed through telling us how adaptation and climate change is very important for us to continue learning and putting into understanding of the Indigenous knowledge, which was first left behind, but still we live with it and every day learning from it. And it has been helping us in combating and fighting climate change in our daily life. The term climate change has been defined by every scholar in different ways, but I would like just to pop it out differently. That's an issue weather change found in a certain place based on my presentation, which is based on the ground level, the grassroots, on the understanding of women and how the IK in Indigenous women is still there and well used in our communities. First of all, climate change affects everyone in the community differently, and we need to understand this. How a man is affected is quite different from a woman or a child, and this that make us to come into understanding that how does this climate change entail into families, arenas, and even affecting the well-being of families. So climate change is a threat to everyone, and we need all to bring our voices to combat climate change, regardless of the gender or the sex that we have in our communities. Indigenous women custodians of Indigenous knowledge. Unfortunately, in our communities, still the documented IK is men-driven, and we need to bring all the voices and bring everyone in our community and document the IK that each group have. It will all help us in the fight of climate change. For instance, in communities of Indigenous pastoralists, every gender has its role and the knowledge that helps in combating climate change. So if you try to see how this community work, you see that it's a way that each group has its own role and have its own knowledge. We bring all this into one, automatically it will help us in combating climate change and even taking us into adaptation and mitigating strategy. In communities of pastoralists, we always see how women have been attached to conservation. It's not only because it's something we need, but Mother Earth has a number of things that we will use them, or it will help us as women. For instance, Indigenous pastoral women are responsible in doing activities like building houses, collecting firewood. All these are small choices that you can see a woman can do, but there are knowledge behind that help in conserving this environment that we see today. It's a taboo for them to cut a tree. Why? This tree has fruits that is nutritive to a child or nutritive to anyone in the community. Oh, this tree has medication. The community of Indigenous live in areas that very remote. Even the health facilities are not near. But if their medication comes from these trees or come from different forest trees, which had been there for a long time, if it is cut or it is destroyed, automatically this community will not be able to have their medication. So automatically we are attached to this environment. But if we keep on protecting the environment and understanding the IK of the communities and the women themselves only, leaving the men behind or leaving the youth behind, it will not be a way of combating. It's not going to be a collective way. So everyone in the community, their voices should be coming together for the aim of continuing combating climate change and even going beyond for adaptation and mitigation strategies. But sometimes we may think this IK that women have, or men have, or youth have, they are only beliefs, but it's something that we were made to believe that. Up to now, if you try to see, most of the indigenous women, most of the indigenous men, youth, and everyone in the communities of indigenous still live their life, still have their tradition and custom, still have their traditional herbs that they still use to date. And we can see, even during the corona period, we could see examples of areas where people are saying, let's go and take medication from a certain place, it helps. Why? Because these people still have their own way of livelihood and it is positively impacting their life. Without listening to outside that, this is the science, we love the science and we always listen to it, but let's combine all the knowledge with the aim of helping Mother Earth. So women, despite the effect of climate change, they have tried to find economic opportunity that help them even during this situation of climate change. We can see now in many markets, we find women, children, youth, and men try to find ways to sustain their livelihood due to the impact of climate change. One of it, making of beads. It has been one of the ways that the communities of indigenous have been helping themselves in this situation of climate change and selling it to different markets to have something for their families. We can see that if you go down to the indigenous women market areas, many women are involving themselves into small business. This is why we can still say that we have to bring all voices in trying to listen to make way out in climate change adaptation and mitigation strategy, and listen how different groups are affected with climate change. Because the way a woman is affected is always different from how a man is affected or a youth is affected. That's why now we can see women who are only staying at home, maybe looking after the sick cattle or milking and only owning that as the way of their life now, but they are getting out due to the impact of climate change and involving themselves into small business and making bread for their family. And many of them now are breadwinners into their family. There is also other activity like rearing of chicken. They don't eat, but all the product they get from that, they sell in a nearby centers, making them be breadwinners of their family, despite the situation of climate change. So we can see that even continue improving their life will continue helping these women. One of the way forward that I would like each one of us to come out with and continue in our advocacy strategy on climate change, we should always think of climate change adaptation must be a gender sensitive and empower the needs to take into account indigenous knowledge, especially in documenting this indigenous knowledge, and not only from one sex, but it should be involve all people. Let's try to see, what do women have? What the indigenous women knowledge? What do they have? As one of the way to know and collectively have this well documented, that even if these people will not be there, other people will learn from it, and it will also going to help us in different advocacy. There is always challenge which need to be addressed in terms of decision making. Let's not leave only for certain people to be the only decision making. Let's see, how can we involve everyone in the community in order that even the well-making strategies that are going to help this community in a certain way, in this adaptation and mitigation way, how can everyone be involved and their voices to be collected? So in decision-making, let's involve everyone. It's also important to empower women economically in terms of decision-making and even income generation activity. They have been coming out doing the activities that I was mentioning, few of them. There are many of them, and there are even other women who will be able to share, or men, by seeing it. It's always important to improve the little they have, to make it more advanced and enable them to continue sustaining the situation, because currently climate change every day is keeping growing and growing, and it's already different from what we face in Longido district and what is being faced maybe in another city. This is why even I define that climate change has been defined in different ways, but let's see the unusual change of weather in a certain area and how these people are affected. Lastly, we need to empower women to have choices in diversity in economic generation sources. As I just mentioned previously, this will help them in this situation of climate change. Lastly, I would love to say that climate change needs to be mainstream, even down, so that everyone should understand this. Everyone should see how this touches us and need everyone to come collectively and fight climate change with a very collective manner on the indigenous knowledge we have. Thank you.
Asante sana Naile Jileji. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, which I'm actually tempted to open the floor for people to, to contribute, to say anything about it. But looking at the time that we have, I would kindly ask that for the sake of time management, we can have a general discussions after all the presentations. When I'm looking at the time, this is the moment that I have to welcome Nigel to tell us, now this is the launch precisely, about the reports of the UNESCO experts meeting on indigenous knowledge and climate change in Africa. This was held in Nairobi. So Nigel, tafadhali, karibu sana, na asante sana kwa muda wako.
Asante sana na hamjambo. It's a great pleasure to join you, and I hope we can hear each other well. I have to say what a pleasure it is to have Pingos running this international workshop. I remember the days in Arusha where it was difficult to download emails with attachments, and now I see Pingos running international webinars, so that's really great. And really to humbly acknowledge and value the inputs of the two first speakers, two very powerful addresses, very important messages, and a pleasure to be working with you. So UNESCO has, over a 5-year period, had some grant support to work with Indigenous pastoralists in 7 different communities around Africa. And we gathered in Nairobi 2 years ago to have a workshop looking at the research results. And right away, I would like to thank also Swedish CEDA Research Agency and the Japan Funds and Trust for their financial support for this process. I do want to say to Dr. Moyongi, we are so pleased to hear not only your African leadership and your valuing of not African knowledge, but also Africans as actors in decision-making and deciding where priorities go for responding to climate change and finding African-based solutions. That's really a vision that we share. And Naileji Leji, you've really expanded that about participation in decision-making around gender equality and gender transformation within those relationships. So what I'm going to do is try to share with you a short PowerPoint about our work, but also I'm going to share with you, I'm going to stop my camera and I'm going to share with you a few links as well. So here's the link to the report. And I'm going to hopefully find the right link. You know, mimi ni mzee. At my age, I'm having to learn new things on the internet. So, okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So this was a 5-year project to work with pastoralists in different parts of Africa to empower them around community-based research. And I do want to put a lot of emphasis on that of all the things we learned in this process was that rural pastoralist communities led by organizations, including Pingos, are able to generate extremely important information about the changing climate, about the weather, about the ecosystems, about the complexity of the interaction of atmospheric and terrestrial phenomena, which we'll look at in a moment. And it allows people to be stronger actors within their national, regional, and international processes. So if there's one takeaway message from this whole process, it is that the empowerment process of community-led research is critical for our future in coping with climate change. So we were able to work with Indigenous peoples organizations in Burkina Faso, Chad, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. Each project led by people on the ground to tell their story. There was also a lot of really valuable interaction between the different pastoralist researchers around what they were learning, and that created a new type of synergy. So even though there are very, very different contexts, some of these are Sahelian countries, some of them were more equatorial humid areas, some of them more densely or less densely populated areas, and some of the pastoralists were transhuming over very large territories, particularly Chad being a case, and others for example, in Uganda, who were less mobile, less nomadic. So we had very different stories being told, but in fact, there were a lot of synergies and shared messages between them. So also to emphasize, and Dr. Moyungi has touched on this, is that the actual instruments that deal with international policy on climate change already acknowledge and recognize the importance of Indigenous peoples' knowledge and their knowledge systems, and specifically Article 7.5 of the Paris Agreement under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And our sister Hindu will be speaking later about her work with the facilitative working group on that. We realized that Indigenous knowledge, in a way, differently from science. We talk about, we focus a lot on the interaction of science and Indigenous knowledge. Some people want to say Indigenous knowledge is science, so they're the same thing. They actually have different origins and functions, even though they also share a lot of related elements in observation, theory building, theory testing, and reactions. But some of the important things about Indigenous knowledge is that they're locally based, they're transmitted through culture, through practices, they're specific to their landscapes, but also they're connected to people's value systems, to their beliefs and what they do every day. So a scientist does not walk out in the middle of the Serengeti or other out into the Chadian plains near Lake Chad every day of the year to take care of the livestock. So it's the experience of livestock herding outdoors, watching the night sky, watching the day sky. It's those practices that bring the depth of the knowledge. Also, as Naileji has said very clearly, there are specific gender dynamics. So you can talk in a bubble about science, and we saw this a bit in other major science challenges, such as the current pandemic, but even I would say the AIDS, HIV crisis, that you can talk scientifically, but you need to also understand the social context in which knowledge is produced and decisions are made. So what UNESCO has been emphasizing is that there's a complementarity of the relationship between science production, science analysis, and what knowledge is held by indigenous peoples and local communities. Dr. Moyungi has said, I think very pertinently, very trenchantly, that indigenous knowledge in Africa got devalorized, delegitimized by the colonial process. So I think it's actually quite relevant as we talk about building new relationships between science and indigenous knowledge in Africa, that whatever we're talking about, whatever our intentions are, there is a decolonization process within that. So it's not just science that's changing, but indigenous knowledge is changing, policymaking is changing, and how do we bring in a virtuous, creative, and a result that benefits everybody, the people at the ground, the people who need it, and the national development process. So touching very lightly on what came out of the research, and you can read the report. We're also looking forward to publishing with our partners some more of the results. But what we noted in all of the research was that indigenous pastoralists are looking at atmospheric information. So they're looking at wind direction, the speed of the wind, clouds. We have Adam Olimwarabu who's going to speak about his very interesting work on that. There's a lot of atmospheric information that I will not go into the details, but that is quite key in one part of the observation. There is night sky observation. Almost all of the research pointed to lunar cycles, the colors of the moon, the constellation appearance, and obscurity of the night sky. Plant blooming. Plants played a very big role in people's analysis, when they seed, when they bloom, the behavior patterns of different plants, but also the appearance and disappearance of different plants. Everybody put emphasis on livestock and wildlife behavior. People talked about bird migratory patterns, bird nesting patterns, presence of certain insects or their disappearance. And I have to say, when Hindu and I were presenting this to the Minister of the Environment in Chad, he listened and listened, then he said, but I grew up like that. I grew up in an oasis, but I never thought as a minister that you can put together an indigenous knowledge system with your national science capacity and strengthen the two of them by drawing these pieces in. And this is my key point for this workshop, is the research partners came up with more than 1,000 indicators within your knowledge systems that you use for forecasting weather, seasonal patterns, but also medium-term and longer-term climatic patterns. Everybody experienced climate stress. Everybody said that their normal predictive system was challenged by the changes, but fundamentally people were still heavily relying on indigenous knowledge. That knowledge was processed through indigenous institutions. In contrast, African scientific meteorological weather forecasting only has a 30% success rate. Almost all African weather forecasting is based on sea surface temperatures. So fundamentally, only one type of indicator is used, and most of that information is gathered by Western countries, and we in Africa filter it through our system and try to determine what the weather will be like. The outstanding evidence is that the indigenous and analytical process, observational process, is much more holistic. It's more integrated within the nature-based solutions and ecosystems-based adaptation. And people are not only observing, they're also then acting on that as well, which is distinct from a scientific process. Our observation was most of the meteorologists were fascinated by this information, that Indigenous people were bringing much more detailed knowledge about landscapes, weather patterns, microclimates, but also seasonal patterns. The seasonal calendars that the meteorologists worked with were often not as detailed as the Indigenous peoples. And as Hindu experienced in her research, in Chad, there's more than one season there's more than one seasonal pattern depending where you are in the country, which is why people use transhumance. So there's a lot of implications about that, but fundamentally is that our scientific capacity really could be boosted by a much stronger relationship with African Indigenous knowledge. And I think that speaks to Dr. Muyungi's point about the decolonization of our knowledge. We'll be sharing these PowerPoints with you. This is just a drop where we've been trying to look at some of the key messages that you brought to us. And for the purpose of time, I won't go into this in great detail, but we realize that Maasai herders are using their language system, long-term memory of the environment, exchanges between elders and younger people to be able to create an analytical pattern of what they think will happen and responding to that. Within that, and Naileji Leji has spoken in great detail, she also, I have to say, we are grateful of how much she brought in the gender element, because it turned out to be very key in the research, the way that men and women hold knowledge. So that element has to be integrated. And in climate science, we do not necessarily see gender equality in the scientific community. Therefore, it's very valuable that the positivist communities address this in discussing knowledge production. But also what we learned, people often say that Indigenous knowledge is only relevant in your local area, maybe your own village or something. But when you deal with pastoralists, we're looking at very large frameworks. So at the end of the finance to the grant sequence of the project, Veronica and a number of you joined scientists in Nanyuki in central Kenya. And what we realized, if you look at the Samburu, Laikipia, Narok, Kajiado, Arusha, Morogoro, that entire cattle belt across East Africa, that there is one system of knowledge with a lot of different detail in it. But it means that you can do scaling, large scale and smaller scale knowledge analysis using related languages. Just to touch on the climate and gender, which Naileji Leji has spoken more clearly about, is the changes in the environment are changing livelihoods, and that's changing gender dynamics. How do we make that a positive process rather than just leave it haphazard and sometimes leave a lot of pressure on the communities around changing families and changing roles? We'll share with you, and you'll find it in the report. The report is available at the moment in English and French, plus there are policy briefs. They're on our website, which you can find. And I thought I would just end with this Afar quote from one of the community researchers, is the way we understand what's going to happen in the lowlands is by going up to the highlands. It's by standing on the shoulders of our elders that we understand how the world is and how we need to respond to it. So I'm going to stop there and hand back to our chair. And I hope that was useful, and we at UNESCO are available to support and share the information that we have and to continue our partnerships with you. Thank you for that, and I will stop sharing.
Asante sana. Thank you so much, Mzee Nigel. Despite the fact that you are really Mzee, but I think you have been able to do justice to your Uze, because the report is really furnished with a lot of photos that you have taken yourself, and the presentation is awesomely done. No technical difficulty encountered. I'm so glad for this presentation and for the insights you have presented, and I'm learning that all the presenters, all the people who have spoken already have done the same thing, but in a different languages. Different set of characteristics and traits have been brought upon, looking into how it is important to build new relationships between science and indigenous knowledge. End of quoting Mzee Nigel. Asante sana. I am tempted to open the floor, but I'll stick to the plan. And this is the moment we have to move ahead. And welcome, now we are going to listen from Gideon Sanago. He'll be talking about pastoralist engagement with the Tanzanian government on climate change policies. Gideon, karibu sana.
Asante sana Chansa, shukran. Let me try to connect to share my screen. Anyone see my screen?
We can see.
Yes, we see it.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Chansa, and thanks so much, Dr. Muyungi and Dr. Nigel and Nelegileji for their presentations, which really have already, shaped my presentations. But I will try to focus more about our engagement as indigenous people in Tanzania with our governments, including the policies at the national level. And I'll try also to touch on our engagement as indigenous people at the global level and policies issues. So my colleagues have already spoken about how the climate change impacted in vulnerable indigenous people at all different levels, including the gender-related matters. But it is really the fact that climate change, effects become one of the global crises threatening the human environment and their survival. But indigenous people globally are the most vulnerable affected groups by climate change. We're the most group affected by climate change within the mainstream society. And the climate change is something real. It is really real and severe, and it's really affected the indigenous people in one way or another. But when you look at how the climate change interventions have been done at different levels, when you look at the adaptation and mitigation measures, a lot of resources have been, allocated for mitigation rather than the adaptations. And we call upon the urgent, matters to be taken to address the adaptation needs, because it is very critical, and the immediate measures is really needed for survival of indigenous people. Dr. Nigel and even Dr. Muyungi and I have already talked about the impact of climate change to different levels, but you can see in my screen, there's so many impact of climate change to indigenous people, including the conflicts arising as a result of the resources. We can see floods, there's a water catchments have been drought. Desertification is one of the factor impacts to indigenous people. There's the issue of deforestation, livestock disease. You can see livestock is dying. There's floods, but all these are, caused the number of issues. One, there's a food insecurity. In our landscape, as indigenous people, we have seen recently invasive species. We call it magugu carrots that affecting the grazing area, and which make livestock really suffering to get enough pasture because of these invasive plants. There's a decline of traditional institutions. These institutions are of very paramount because they are setting rules and producing kind of traditional guidelines to ensure, the community are using the resources in an appropriate manner. We have also, lots of traditional knowledge, identity, and our culture as a result of climate change impacts. Nowadays, we have mobility, and we believe on mobility as livestock mobility. but there's this unnecessary mobility that's already witnessed in recent years, and this is because of the climate change. So people are not settled in a traditional way. Conflict between indigenous people and other land users as a result of the climate change impacts. We have also seen human-wildlife conflicts, but also loss of livestock, I've already mentioned, and properties. The other major issues nowadays are the increased poverty on indigenous people livelihoods. So these are the impact caused by the climate change. When you talk about the coordination of indigenous people on climate change issues in Tanzania, we are coordinated as indigenous people. We have established Tanzanian Indigenous People Network on Climate Change, coordinated and hosted by Pingos Forum, a network of 34 members organization across the countries, CSOs from the indigenous communities. But also under the network, we have managed to form a knowledge holder platform focusing on climate change, where elders, traditional leaders, youth, women, all of them collectively, come together and discuss, share experience, lesson learned on climate change related matters. It is a very new platform just established last year. We're also working with the local government authorities at the district levels, with the councillors and the responsible, authorities, to ensure we are mainstreaming the climate change related knowledge on indigenous people. Coordination and support community environments group network. So we are trying to make sure that if there is any groups, environmental groups at the grassroots level, we bring them on board. We support them in terms of training and capacity buildings, workshops. We also support community dialogues at the grassroots level. One of the issues that we are addressing as the network is to, support, link, and share learning and funding opportunities to our CSOs members, so that they can access fundings and this ongoing, online meetings, training, capacity buildings, so that people, would learn through the online meeting as a result of the, this pandemic, the COVID-19, where people cannot really meet and share and discuss climate change issues. So we link people with other like-minded stakeholders on climate change. Our very core issue also is focused on research, information, documentations through print and electronic media. We use the televisions, the newspapers, and social media to ensure that we package our informations and share widely to public. We also demystify climate change information and disseminations. We produce policy briefs, documentaries, infographics on climate change. And recently we have managed to develop a documentary on women knowledge on climate change. And as far as this meetings concerned about the gender-related climate change issues. So we have this documentary you can access, and Chance I can share with you. The other thing, now policies and government engagement. We've been engaging with our governments at different levels and with policies. Currently, we have been working very closely with our GCF board member, Dr. Muyungi, and I thank you very much for being with us whenever we inviting you to come and share with us your insight as your experience as the GCF board member. The Office of Director of Environment is one of the important offices that we are actually working closely. The NDA, National Designated Authority, who is a focal point office for the Green Climate Fund. Whenever you need accreditations, you must have you must acquire a letter, a recommendation letter from the NDA, from the Vice President Office, but also we are working closely with the Ministry of Water and other key ministries on climate change. We are also, as organizations, as Pingos Forum, focusing on policies and strategies to come up with very recommendations in favor of indigenous people. For example, we have been, participated fully on REDD+, reducing emission, on deforestation and forest degradation strategy formulations. It was back 2012. So our organizations was participated to this. NDCs, National Determined Contributions, is one of the issue we have been engaged and input to the documents and come up with the recommendation from the indigenous people. Climate change strategy responses is part of the document we're engaging on. Paris agreements is one of the also issues we have been engaged. And Paris agreement came with the result of Green Climate Fund as a baby, is a baby of the UNFCCC. And within the GCF, we have also managed to participate in the formation of the Indigenous People Policy and develops Indigenous People advisory groups. So we have IP team who are following closely on the implementation of the GCF policies and projects that have been submitted to the GCF. Facilitative working group on the local communities on indigenous people, and Hindu will have an opportunity to take us through how they have managed to come up with the implementation of the LCAPP. As a network, we have been coordinating indigenous people to make sure they participate on the World Bank environmental and social standards, especially ESS 7, which is focusing on indigenous people. We are, as indigenous people, been follow up on the finance, climate finance related issues, Green Climate Fund project in Tanzania, as I already mentioned, the Blue Action Fund, the project which is really taking place and is ongoing to be implemented by the KFW. There's a CRDB bank projects that we are following up, and we have already submitted the indigenous people recommendation to be considered before submission to the GCF. UNDP, UNEP, IUCN, those are the accredited entities that we are working on. I've already mentioned about the accredited entities in Tanzania, especially KFW and CRDB Bank. Their proposal have already reviewed, and we have submitted our issues before submitting to the GCF body for approval. We've been also engaged with UNFCCC, SB, subsidiary bodies of the UNFCCC meetings and the GCF board meetings. We've been engaging and ensure that issues of indigenous people are presented and are being, taken into considerations. Currently, we are following up on a new National Adaptation Plan, NAPS, with support from the UNEP. This is the area that really indigenous people, and I encourage most of you, every one of you, to ensure that we participate because our government is really looking fundings to support the implementation of the NAPS. And maybe Dr. Richard will share with us if he has any updates about the fundings that the proposal that submitted to the GCF seeking funding for the development of the NAP. About challenges, Always there are challenges that indigenous people are facing. Lack of recognition of indigenous people rights. This is a question of concern, and we have been, trying to push this so that indigenous people, indigenous knowledge have been recognized, and we need really to see it featured in our policy documents. Climate change.
Hi, Gideon.
Hello?
So sorry to interrupt your presentation. This is Hindu. Just to mention that I'm starting another meeting. So if I can speak after the two other presentation, will be really good. Sorry to interrupt you. So then I will be just in this meeting. And then when all the other presentation end, you can send me also WhatsApp, but I'm also following you with one airing. So sorry for that. Thank you.
Okay, let me wrap
Okay.
up immediately, and Chasa will give you a space.
No. You can go slowly, and you can continue the other presentation from Adam and from the other person, and then I will be taking over after the two presentations. Because
Okay.
I will. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, Hindu, it is well noted.
Okay. Thank you so much. So another challenge we are facing as indigenous people is that the climate change intervention policy formulated does not take into account specific issues of indigenous people. So this is why we are putting a lot of emphasis to ensure that our issues, have to be taken into considerations when formulating these policies. Another challenge is on land grabbing and land conflicts among indigenous people and other communities, and especially what is really facing us here is conservations, expanding the conservation into village lands, the adequate funding to support indigenous people adaptation needs. We really need, fundings to address. There's a lot of high demand from our communities on water, on other resources, so that they can accommodate their adaptation needs. Harassment and intimidation of indigenous people. This is one of the great challenges that indigenous people are facing. And in terms of way forward, we really look forward to actively engage on policies and strategies formulations. We will continue working with our governments and like-minded stakeholders on climate change related matters. We will continue supporting our communities to dialogue on climate change, adaptation, mitigation strategies and measures. Capacity building on awareness creations will be continue, to be provided to our communities. Support the Indigenous People Network on climate change communities to effectively engage on national climate change processes. We'll continue monitoring to see, the extent of the observancy of international standards on right of indigenous people. And finally, and lastly, information and documentation is, as I already mentioned, that is our core area of concern, that we will continue, document the best practices of the indigenous people knowledge on climate change, so that we can influence policies and decision makers processes. With this, Mr. Moderator, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Gideon, for your amazing presentation and looking into how IPs in Tanzania are collaborating with the government on aspects of climate change. I thank you for your time. I'll leave you to rest as I welcome Adam Kuleit Ole Mwarabu, and now on your presentation in regarding observation of climate change in your region, Morogoro. Please, I welcome you, Mzee Adam. Madam, can you hear us? Mzee Mwarabu, karibu kwa ajili ya wasilisho lako.
Jambo.
Karibu.
Kwenye wedi kuna 1.10 sasa. Nazungumzia hicho kitu. Hello?
Naam, Mzee Mwarabu tunakusikia. Karibu.
Asante. Nataka uweke kwenye slide yako hiyo.
Nini?
Presentation.
Ifungue presentation. Unayo kwenye kompyuta yako?
Itakubali huko?
Ifungue tu, alafu utabonyeza sehemu imeandikwa share.
Aha. Sawa. Haya, ngoja.
Kama pia ukiona changamoto kufungua, Mzee Mwarabu, you may just take us through the presentation kwa wewe kuisoma na kutuelezea, na sisi tutakuwa tukifollow up.
Sawa, asante sana.
Asante.
My presentation will be more on the climate change, on the rain clouds. As we all know, we have a challenge of in the area of clouds because of severe cutting of trees, and also the issue of loss of traditional knowledge among communities, especially the young people, and the population is on increase, and this is causing a challenge on the preservation of forest, because we have there's a challenge of charcoal burning in our areas, and migration is prohibited in many areas. There's no, we have a challenge in practicing our traditional knowledge because of land challenges and also the coming in of climate change. This is a big problem now. So in the recent years, we did a number of research, and we came up with a number of recommendations, but I would like to mention that we identified 4 rain clouds in our areas, especially among the parochial pastoralists. These clouds are a Lorcaria. This is found in the eastern part, and it rains mostly in the eastern part, in the coast areas. We have also Maruguru found in the Uruguru Mountains, and it also rains in the coastal areas. And Lorcaria and the Maruguru are one family, and they can rain together, but Maruguru is more violent because it causes a lot of thunder and lightning, and less rains, but it plays a big role of attracting other clouds. Another family is a family of Kipusi, which is found in the Eastern Belt as well, in the mountains of Kilimanjaro, Usambara, Pare, Mount Kenya. And this is a very important rain cloud in our area, and it helps us rain a lot. And we have macarot. This is a very important cloud in our community. We even named the macarot as a Olopiro Longishu, a cattle and a people clouds. This is a cloud that is originating from Congo Basin and it moves towards eastern part, and it has a stop in a mountain called the Makarot in Ngorongoro area, and it moves towards Kilimanjaro, and you unify with Kipusi to have a rains in a big area. This is one family, but Makarot is meeting a number of challenges because of loss of forest within the cloud's habitats. But in 1998, we experienced the loss of Makarot, and they came back in 2011, and still raining, but with a challenge of loss of forests. And this is a challenge that we experience as of now. We also have a web rain. This web rain is a unification of the 4 rain clouds. They unify Lorcaria, Maruguru, Kipusi, and Makarot. They unify together and rain in a big area. And that's why we normally have a rain that covers the big area. Again, there is a challenge in the unification because the 4 clouds have a language. And among the community members, very few people now can understand the language spoken by the rain clouds when they meet. And normally when they meet, the rain is heavy, but with and calm, and no thunder, and only lightning, but a type of lightning that is friendly to human and the environment. We also have a challenge on the areas of habitats of these rain clouds, especially when we talk of Maruguru rain clouds in the Uruguru Mountains. People live in these mountains and do agriculture, and they used to follow tradition, use a traditional knowledge that kept them friendly with the environment. But in recent years, the young people, especially the young generation, is no longer practicing the terracing and all this kind of cultivation in the mountains. When you go to the Ngu Mountains, where Lorcaria is situated or habitat, the same challenge. In the Ngu Mountains, we have a very big influx of people in these mountains, and they clear in the forest. And the same with Kilimanjaro, the population is very high, and the mountain, which is a standing alone mountain, is also being affected by warm temperatures, and even the ice on the top of the mountain is getting less. And regarding Makarot Mountains, still is more friendly because we have pastoral communities living in this area, but in the routes between Makarot towards Kilimanjaro, between we have a big population, and the people are clearing these clouds roots. I forgot to mention that Mau forest is one of the routes used by macarot, and it's also facing a challenge in the side of Kenya and also along in the side of Tanzania and also along Lake Victoria. On the indicators of rains, of course, as Miguel mentioned, the plants, the insects, the livestock, the elderly people, and wild animals are helping us to indicate the coming in of rain or the coming in of drought. As pastoral communities, we have been living in harmony with nature, but in recent years, we are facing a number of challenges, as I mentioned earlier, that even migration is a challenge now. And if we cannot migrate, there's a challenge on the area of vegetation. On the rains, of course, we have short rains and long rains. These short rains are rather normally it rains used in the past to rain in September, but moved to October and now to November. But there is a challenge of uncertainty because we can predict. Hello?
Yes, Adam, we are following you.
Okay, thank you. So we have this challenge on the months of the rains because of uncertainty. We can predict the rain and we can have the indicators, but still the rain is not raining in time. And we have TMA people contacted us also asking the same question, that they have a challenge on the prediction. Also on the astronomical knowledge, the stars, especially the evening and the morning stars, are helping us. But sometimes there's a challenge also in the movement of the rain clouds, especially along the Milky Way, because within the Milky Way, we have rivers, we have the ponds or dams. We have one side with rich stars and another side with less stars. The one with less stars is a dry season, and the one with rich in stars is a rainy season. So we have a challenge on the movement of the Milky Way because it can predict as well, but at the same time, we have a challenge that is not right in time. Another is on the keeping of traditional knowledge because of coming in of new face, especially different cultures being accepted in our communities. We have the beliefs like when it comes to the need of making prayer, because normally rain prayers are done by women. There's a challenge in some areas that people do the prayer and others say we have another phase. So this is a challenge to us. We can no longer pray for rains in rivers, in ponds or in dams. We rather pray in churches and all this. So this is also a challenge in that area. So when I come to recommendations, because I forgot to mention that we have a Maya with all these 12 months. with one side being a green year and another side being a dry year. We have also moon calendar, and this helps us tell of rains, but also when there's a ritual or festival, this can be organized depending on the appearance of the moon. So on the recommendation side, as we not see the challenges, there is a need of doing more research, but also they need to have a rain cloud and other knowledges community center. This is a center where community members can exchange their experiences, and they can pass the knowledge from elders to young people. Another thing is to merge our scientific knowledge and with the modern science, because there is a gap. Another is the need of daily monitoring of the weather changes and climate changes as well. And another is a networking among indigenous peoples, practicing the same knowledge to share experiences on adaptation, but also on keeping of the knowledge. And we need to do a lot to ensure that young people receive this knowledge and keep this knowledge. We also need digital preservation or digital archiving of this knowledge in a way that is used by the community members. It's not more on exploitation of the knowledge. So we call for more funding of this activity, plus other activities that need support to ensure that people live in harmony and they are not negatively affected by the severe impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Asante sana, thank you so much. Ashena Leng, merci beaucoup, Mzee Adam Kuleid Mwarabu, for your amazing presentation. The first time I heard Adam presenting about the clouds, it was so surreal. But again, this is indigenous knowledge that has to be mainstreamed. But it's up to us to see how we can advocate for it, how we can push for it, how we can have more partners regarding it, and how we can befriend people, we can befriend institutions, we can befriend giant governments to having and adapting the indigenous knowledge for the betterment of our community. Asante sana Mzee Mwarabu. This is first presentation from the series of key messages from the experts meeting. Now I would like to welcome the second presentation from our key messages from the expert meeting held in Nairobi. And this is from Saitoti Parmelo. He's going to talk about key lessons from pastoralists on engaging with meteorologists. Karibu sana Saitoti.
Asante sana. I'm wondering if you can hear me well.
Very well.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. And it has been really a challenge for me this morning to connect to the internet. We have some problems with it down here. I have a presentation with me, but I have a challenge in displaying it because of the internet. So I'm wondering if I can just go through and you can listen to me.
That can also be an option. You can take us through from the 10 minutes that you have. Karibu.
Asante sana. Actually, my presentation is about pastoralist knowledge and the focused skills on weather. This is based in Tanzania. And I'll get you through the different researches that we have actually done. And this research was basically basing on the historical coping and adaptive strategy of the Maasai pastoralist in Tanzania. And this research was actually done in Terrat, Simanjiro. And one of the things that we are looking at was the livelihood skills and the livelihood general of the pastoralist Maasai, basically on weather forecasting. The methodologies which we actually used were we had a different interview based on the focus group discussion, bringing the pastoralist women and men together and learn on how they practice their daily life, basically basing on weather forecasting. But again, we had an opportunity to conduct a key informants interview as well, basically having those very competent persons, influential persons in the community. As we know, pastoralists, when you say leaders, they normally much of the time consider male gender and forget about female. But here, what we dealt on was basically those people influential in that particular community and who are knowledgeable on weather forecasting. Again, we dealt with storytelling, and this is basically a very important aspect that indigenous communities are using on their livelihood systems. That whenever you find an indigenous person and try to kind of interrogating him or her, what they tell is there's no direct answer to what questions you ask, but they tell in forms of storytelling. But actually also we had some validation workshops that actually going through what we have been getting on the ground and sharing experiences and sharing the data that we have brought on the ground. What we actually went through as findings of this very important research was we realized that pastoralism is dependent on possession of knowledge, actually of weather forecasting, that in order to become a pastoralist, you need to have this indigenous knowledge to you to survive. And in order for you to be able to predict what will be next, like what method of examining plants to be using, what kind of behavior can you read, can you realize, can you observe, and can you, kind of reading from the animals that are surrounding you in order to know the future life that it will be like taking off with your livestock. But again, we have this kind of knowledge on clouds, which Ole Morabu has actually examined it. I used to call him Mr. Clouds because ever since come across the weather climate issues, I have actually never heard about these terminologies that they use, like Makarot, like the clouds in Ngorongoro and wherever houses where the cloud resides. So with the name Mr. Clouds, actually it drives me to understand that, wow, even the pastoralists themselves have traditional knowledge on observing patterns of clouds and to know how the climate will be in the next year. Knowledge of the ecosystem or rangelands is also of the essence here, that we kind of found like this is very, very important, that the pastoralists themselves can read, the ecosystem. That today, this is why Ole Marabo was mentioning like movement, mobility, which is being restricted, can be like a very, very dangerous threat to the pastoral livelihood system, because as we move along as pastoralists, we expect that the place that we have left will grow and retain the same system as it used to be. But if these restrictions really happens and it takes off, it means that climate change impacts will get increased, and they probably the traditional conservation system may be affected. So this is very, very important to take us all along. We have a meeting that we have actually held. It is a transdisciplinary dialogue among the pastoralists and the scientists. we kind of conducted this workshop, very, very important dialogue, bringing the Tanzania Meteorological Department meteorologists who are using science in weather forecasting, and these important traditional leaders or influential people who use their traditional knowledge in weather forecasting. And what actually we intend to learn from was, first of all, to analyze the synergies opportunities that does exist between pastoralists and the scientists. How do they really are they really coming together? Is there a point that they can do something all together, despite the fact that traditional knowledge is not written and saved anywhere? And how the traditional or traditional seasonal calendar is taken on board by the pastoralists themselves. But again, how do they really understanding weather and the climate in Tanzania? How do they really work on this? But again, to analyze the opportunities of synergies between the pastoralists and the scientists, rain clouds, taxonomies, in order to assess this kind of rains in arid and the semi-arid areas. How do these traditional leaders understand this aspect? And do this really meteorological department or meteorological or scientists, do they really understand this kind of knowledge? But again, it was important to explore the role that indigenous knowledge can have in the processes responsible of elaboration, actually. Are these people really being engaged in these processes? And how will they be engaged? Can give to the processes, and how those instruments can be enhanced for their users, for example. Can this be of importance to these traditional people who are not scientists and never use scientific methodologies to focus the weather? If we look at the methods of prediction where the pastoralists are using in their traditional livelihood, we have what is called clouds, as you mentioned, Mr. Clouds. This is normally done in the morning to predict how the weather turns out in the next day. Is it hot? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it friendly to their livelihood? Is it friendly to their livestock on that particular day? So they can read from the clouds, and this is vested on the traditional elders. You know, for the youth, it's really a challenge. And as Ole Mwarabu is on board here, I think he has to take an opportunity sometimes to make sure that even the young generations are taught, even without doing some consultancies work, so that they may have also this kind of knowledge. Because when the elderly get away, like if they leave, it means that the next generations may lose this very important knowledge. But again, studying of the stars or astronomical science, usually this is very, very important during the dry season, because they focus on the beginning of the rain, that actually when the next year is coming, how will it be? Will it be friendly to our livestock, or will it be dangerous, or will it more dry? You know? So studying the stars or astronomical science can show them to understand that the next season is good for them or bad. And again, remember, the seasons of the Maasai pastoralists is dry and rain season. But again, another method is by slaughtering goat. This is to examine the actually this what we call small intestines of the small intestines of the goat. That these intestines, is it like can it show any signs that actually shows that the next month or the next year is bad for us as pastoralists? Or how will it be? And this can be read by looking at the small bubbles. There are small bubbles within the small intestines of the goat that can subsequently show how will the season be. for them to be able to focus on the next year. Actually, we were kind of also got an opportunity to create comparisons between the indigenous knowledge and the scientific approach of weather focusing in Tanzania at that particular dialogue. And one was reading from the rain clouds that Maasai community predict the weather and climate by reading the clouds, whereas the scientists actually looking at their scientific methods by placing scientific instruments, reading in the morning and in the evenings in order to understand how the weather will be. And the scientists using this scientific approach to determine the clouds for the rain, where if this machineries or instruments fails, it means that for them, they can't really be able to understand how the position of that particular weather can be in a particular day. But again, reading the stars, for example, we have the star called the Klaken and the Alakirai. These are the stars, the names of the stars read by the Maasai, and they predicted the weather accordingly, that how the weather will be for the next day. And this is actually can only be understood by the Maasai themselves and those who are vested with this particular knowledge. Whereas the scientific method are setting stars by predicting whether that particular time of the year appears to be good or to appear to be bad. So they have specifically kind of, you know, and we have insects, as Ole Marabu mentioned. We have also traditional beliefs in God that, you know, with the Maasai pastoralist livelihood, the people who are normally taking this kind of traditional belief are women. And when women are going to that particular prayer, it is respected and no man is allowed to be around that particular area. And it is believed that God hears women mostly than men. The reason behind, nobody knows. Maybe Olimarabu later may tell us that why is women more heard. And whenever they go there, actually at the end of the day, the rain comes if it is a dry season. Actually, the formation of communication is very, very important. Exchange of information within the pastoral community is also of the essence in this particular weather focus. They can communicate and read from one another's location that, okay, what happened to that particular area? Is it good for us to come for our livestock? Or let's say how the weather is in that particular area. So this formation sharing is also a very, very important to analyze this very important weather focusing pattern, which actually scientists do not really have this, but basically they depend on this environment and their instruments, how they read and how they can basically understand. And for them to be able to indicate that it is only the scientists who can read, but any other person cannot really be able to read. This is shortly with the presentation that I have prepared, as given the fact that my time is 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chancellor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Permello, and I love the fact that you have put it out clearly that exchange of information is of essence in analyzing the weather forecasting patterns, which actually them scientists like it. So this is a moment I understand you have to be able to tell people to respect the fact that we are indigenous peoples and our unity, our diversity is actually what makes us as one. Thank you. I'll give you a break
Pleasure.
right now, and I'll be welcoming Hindu. Hindu, I understand you are ready right now. So, c'est avec plaisir de vous inviter. Karibu Hindu, bienvenue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so sorry. I just like have another meeting at the same time, but I also hear all the presentation with the other airing. And thank you so much for all of you for sharing the knowledge. And I think from my side, Nigel talked about how my community is also using the traditional knowledge for the climate adaptation and mitigation through the project that we did. So I will be quick, as Gideon and Adams and many other here. We are all in the climate negotiations since so many years. But I take you just through the COP21 in Paris in 2015. So that was the one who was very important for all of us, because the COP decisions and then the Paris Agreement come out with 5 references on indigenous peoples. 2 on the indigenous people's traditional knowledge. So one of them is the Article 7.5 of the Paris Agreement on the climate adaptation. And another is the Decision 135 of the Paris Agreements that recognize the indigenous people's knowledge as so valuable, and there is need of exchanging the knowledge of the indigenous peoples through a platform. So that's the one who created the facilitative working group. And there is 2 on the rights of indigenous people. So one on the preambles of the Paris Agreements and another one into the decision of the Paris Agreements. And there is another reference on the full and on the participation. There was not full, but participation of all the stakeholders, women, gender, youth, including indigenous peoples and the local communities. So in these meetings, what's interesting for us, it is the Decision 135 that create the local communities and indigenous people platform. So the first discussions was in the COP22, where we have the establishment of the indigenous peoples and local communities, and then the first negotiations. It have been for us historically, because we changed the way of the negotiations, because we said you cannot negotiate for us and without us, because indigenous people's knowledge are held by the indigenous persons. And if we are not at the negotiation, we are not sitting in the tables, so we cannot agree that you decide. So for the first time, we have been sitting in the tables and then discuss. So the decision that come out, it was organization of the dialogue facilitated by the indigenous peoples, who could be the co-chair with the SABSTA president. So in the next SABSTA meeting, we had an indigenous person who co-chaired the meeting of this dialogue during the negotiation. And in this negotiation, we negotiated how indigenous peoples can be in the same level with the state parties to discuss about our knowledge in this platform. So the decision ended up with the creation of a facilitative working group with an equal status, 7 from government representative and 7 from indigenous peoples. So from indigenous peoples, you all know from our 7 socio-cultural regions, and from the government, it was the 5 UN regions, but they added 1 from developing countries and another one from small islands. So there is a reason for adding from developing countries, because as African indigenous peoples, our knowledge is so tested and they are so diverse and varies in all our way of living. So Africa region have 1 representative, and least developing countries also as African countries have on another 1 1 representative. So the first work was the work plan was established for 2 years. The work plan had 12 activities, and through those activities, there was many of them who all focus on how the indigenous people's knowledge can be revised, and most of them have the right-based approach that come up there, and where people say we wanted to see more our rights to be respected, because I hear many of you talk also about the importance of the rights. Before that, our knowledge can be considered. So through it, we have the leaders of each activities, and each leader have work on the 12, on the one activities over the 12 of them. So I give you briefly, the activity 1 was focused on how we can have a joint meetings during the COP, and then the facilitative working group agree on having a concept note and come organize this meeting. The second was having a regional gathering, but due to the COVID situation, the regional gathering wasn't implemented as the activity, and it's have been sent into the work plan 3. And then the activity number 3 was on the information about Indigenous peoples' curricula and materials. As you all said, our knowledge are so important, but how we can have them in a curricula, and then it can be translated through younger children who can go to the school. The fourth one was in the thematic training workshops. So some of you was invited to a roundtable discussions, and then we discussed about how the other peoples can work with Indigenous peoples, how we can have our own protocol of working. So that was one of the thematic of the workshop. And the activity number 5 was the outreach and dissemination of the training materials. And then the facilitative working group say how we can have a training materials that can be shared also with the state parties in order to include what we are doing in the policies. The activity 6 was engagement and input across the UNFCCC process. So we know that how we can input it's to create a recommendation to the state parties. So we gather all the rest of the activities and we make recommendations on how the parties can include the Indigenous peoples during the process of the UNFCCC. The activity 7 was how we can map the existing policies, practices on the participation of the Indigenous peoples. And then there was a lot of way that's showing our participation was so weak, but how they can enhance it. Activity 8 was in the multiple stakeholders participation in the session workshop. So we all agree on how those activities can have an annual gathering where we can meet and have a dialogue session to exchange. Activity number 9, I was co-leading this activity. It was mapping the policies and see how those policies include Indigenous peoples. So we mapped over 500 policies on the UNFCCC, and we saw they are so weak. Only 9 NDCs that mention Indigenous peoples, and this is NAPs included. So we have so many data that show it. Indigenous peoples are not fully consulted or included into the policy design. Activity number 10, it's the good practices for Indigenous peoples and local communities participation in the national policies. So I chaired this project that we are working around it with for UNESCO, saying it is one of the good practices. Maybe they can replicate, because we getting able to discuss with our national climate divisions to include it in the policies. Activity number 11 was on the existing funding mechanism. So we did a mapping to see how we are accessing the Indigenous peoples accessing the funding in order to develop the knowledge, but there was so weak also funding design to get Indigenous peoples access. And activity number 12 was promoting the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform at the national level. And also I give the examples as African, how we are doing it by having this kind of network, exchanging our knowledge, and also other projects that we are doing. So all those activities have been revised just on the 21st and 25th of June this year, I mean the last month. So we revised them, we saw the level of the implementation, and we adapt them. So that's helped us to discuss in a new work plan who can go for the next 3 years. And in this work plan, I just shared an email the day before yesterday to all of you, I guess. And if not, I am sure Adam's, Gideon's are copied on it. If you can share the work plan, the introduction, and then the summary of the long document with all the rest of the participants. What we are asking, we are having a regional consultations, all the 7 regions share the documents. For Africa, we have French and English translation of these documents. So we are asking the input only into the work plan. So if you have anything missing that you think you wanted to include, please be sure, put it into this document and send it back to me. And then the facilitative working group members will come and work again in this work plan. And then we can submit it to the negotiations into COP26. That is the one who will help us to see how all we are discussing here around our knowledge can be considered at the UNFCCC and can be negotiated at the COP26, and how our countries will take it back and implement it at the national level. So here is the brief summary of my presentation, and I will be happy again if you didn't receive the work plan and then the introduction and then the summary document. What we are asking, it is only the input into the work plan who is the table, but the 2 other documents, so you can use it also for the rest of your presentation or with the community or with the lobby of your government. So finally, I'm so happy as an African indigenous peoples to be nominated as a co-chair of the facilitative working group from now to the COP also, and to the end of our mandate, who will be into the next June. And so from the now to the next June, we are also thinking about replacing the facilitative working group, as in the decision, indigenous peoples agreed we are going to have only 1 mandate, and we can have new people who can get nominated. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. So here is the end of my presentation. And then, sorry again, I will go back to my meeting, but I will hear you with 1 airing. But before I go to my meeting, if there is a direct question or clarification, I wait to listen from you before to go back to the meeting and to the other meeting and listening to this one. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you so much for your time, Hindu. I'm very glad for getting also your time, despite the fact that you have a lot going on the table. And as a co-chair of the facilitative working group, congratulations, félicitations. And this, after hearing from Hindu's presentation, actually the plenary session is now opened. I advise if you have a question, a direct contribution or anything to Hindu, we can do so before she moves on to the other presentation where she's hearing and listening and following up as well, so that we may be able to share knowledge and experience and have something to share with the community afterwards. Also, take note of the opportunity that she has provided for us to contribute on the work plan. And I kindly ask Hindu, if you may also drop that work plan on this on the chat box, so that people may be able to access them directly if they haven't been able to do so via email, which you sent either to the emails that you have. So yeah.
As I'm using my phone, I cannot
Okay.
drop it here, but what I will do, I will send it again directly in Gideon email. And Gideon, please, if you can drop it in this chat box, it will be lovely. Thank you.
Okay,
Merci
thank you so much.
To my colleagues, I have received your work plan.
Great.
Yes.
So now the floor is open. We may be able to contribute and share questions, ask concerns from all the presentations that we have. I understand we are currently running with time and we are keeping up the pace. So now we have 10 minutes for the discussion. If anyone wants to share something and ask something, this is the moment before we head up to the closing session. Mzee Nigel, please, welcome.
Asante. You know, I just really want to say what an excellent session this has been. You know, Pingos is one of the oldest indigenous peoples organizations on the continent. You've been dynamic for decades now, but really this is superb content. So I really congratulate the whole team. And Ellie, we've enjoyed your multilingual facilitation as well. Very
Merci,
well
merci.
done. Merci beaucoup. On est très impressionné avec le français, évidemment. But I think Hindus also raising issues, and well, I think everybody has touched on key issues, but I think there's some things about what is going to change in Tanzania about when indigenous research has been done. The knowledge has always been there. I think Adam and others have emphasized that you have to sustain knowledge. There has to be an intergenerational process, and Pingos is a very key player in raising that awareness. But also the national science process must change. You know, we talk about how indigenous knowledge is dynamic all the time and changing, but actually science has to change. And one message I just wanted to share with you is I got to meet with the Director General of the National Meteorological Services of Burkina Faso. And he said, what I learned from this project was that science has to change, that meteorology has to change. We went to school thinking that we had to measure air pressure and learn cloud patterns and these things. We didn't realize that the future of Burkina Faso would hang on what was done with meteorology, that in fact, you know, the national peace, national development, people's quality of their lives is all now shaped by climate change. And that we, the meteorologists, we have to learn how to work better with communities. And I think there was a lot of goodwill from particularly African meteorologists, but also from the UN system. So I think out of this workshop, the question is, what is the transformation that you're looking for in Tanzania in terms of cooperation, and what lessons learned can be brought into the UN system? And at the World Conservation Congress in September, we're hoping to have a dialogue between indigenous peoples and the UN system about indigenous knowledge. It needs to play a more prominent role. We all understand that, but how does that change process take place? So maybe those are some questions to consider. What are the next steps? Because the knowledge is there, the partnerships can be there, but I'm not quite sure that all the resources are in place, and there has to be a bit of a change strategy. So again, congratulations to Pingos for excellent work, excellent research, and a really superb presentation here. Asante.
Asante sana, c'est avec plaisir. Nashukuru sana, and thank you for your comments and insights and brainstorming things that we have the knowledge, we have the things in place and institutes in place, but what again are we going to achieve? Musa Juma. Now this is a question to all of us to brainstorm in our head and see the way forward. What do we need for our communities? What do we need for this world? Now, Musa, karibu.
I want to come for good presentation. And my comment and such is myself, I'm adding with policymakers.
Musa, you are a bit breaking up. If you may be able to look onto a better position or type in your questions on the chat box so that we may.
Hello, do you hear me now? Hello, do you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello? Okay. I first congratulate all presenters for what they've been done. And my comment I'm start with Mzee Niger. He proposed to increase the relationship with science. Myself, I'm adding that it is better to increase also relationship with policymakers and the media peoples. Secondly, it is true what Gideon says. Every day is a conflict of land between in our indigenous community areas is increased. Human and wildlife conflict increase, expanding of conservation increase, poverty, conflict between the pastoralists and the farmer increase. So in my side, I'm advised that to increase also relationship between policymaker, journalists, and other stakeholders, as we see that there's a gap between them. Number of them, they don't know that indigenous knowledge. So it is very good if we can increase that relationship between them. Thank you, Mr. Chasa. Hello?
Yes.
Thank you.
Chasa,
Thank
can
you.
I?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Edward,
much.
please.
Yeah. I also, I don't know whether you have invited me, Chansa.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Asante. I think you have mentioned two important issues: the knowledge, availability of the knowledge, and the issue of collaboration. But just adding to that, I think it is there's a very big challenge in terms of recognition of that knowledge and putting that knowledge into policies, into strategies and programs, particularly because at the end of the day, the government play a very important role in adaptation and mitigation of climate change through its policies, the projects, through strategies that it creates. But that knowledge can only be mainstreamed if you value that knowledge. The aspect of valuing the knowledge from indigenous people on on climate change, because if you don't value and recognize that knowledge, and you don't even value and recognize those people that are holding that knowledge, then it will become very difficult to mainstream that knowledge into policies, into strategies, into programs that the government implement. And because already climate change is a very big issue for not only for indigenous people, it is critical to the country development, which definitely require multi-stakeholders engagement and bringing all those knowledge, scientific knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and how people conduct their livelihood, because there has always been in history climate variation or with a variation in different communities, but they always have their ways of doing it even before having the government programs, policies. So I think that it is really trying to strengthen collaboration and trying to negotiate with the government to open up involvement of indigenous people in decision making, and particularly those ones that relate to climate change, because we cannot, even if we have the knowledge, but it is not incorporated into the policy making processes. It is not incorporated into different government programs and strategies. Then that knowledge is just like valueless, and there is no value to that knowledge if it is not really practiced and it is not recognized by those who make decisions in the community. So it comes now to another point of involving the people in decision making, particularly those related to climate change. So I think we should work toward trying to address issues of recognition, toward enhancing collaboration with the government, enhancing understanding and readiness of both parties, indigenous people and also the government, to understand this knowledge and bring it into their policy making process, into their program, into their strategies, so that at least we have a sustainable livelihood where everybody has a role to play in addressing issues of climate change through little knowledge they've acquired from scientific research, but also that is inherent in the community. And unfortunately, the indigenous knowledge, like what Adam was just presenting, is getting lost. Probably it is only Adam and a few others who understand that relationship between how the community conducts itself in relation to the study on clouds and understanding of how different aspects of climate change play their part. Asante sana.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you for this provoking comment on that there's really no value in knowledge if it is not practiced, and hence we should work on recognition. I'd like to ask Dr. Muyungi, if you're following this up, please may you be able to share on how we can bridge the gap between these, where have we been dropping, where have we been losing apart the network and the collaboration that is needed to foster this indigenous knowledge and into incorporating science to the extent that we have to say, all to the extent that it is said, science has to change. But again, it won't change if the knowledge itself and the custodians of this knowledge are not recognized. What can we really do about this, please, Doctor?
I'm sorry, my name is Eric. I'm speaking on behalf of Dr. Muyungi. He has got an emergency, so he left me to take note of whatever is taking place. And he informed that he will agree, and he'll take note, and whatever discussion will be going on, he will be acknowledging. So for now, I don't have anything to say since I'm just on his behalf. I'm working with the UNESCO National Commission, and I've heard what Miguel has said, and even at the UNESCO National Commission, we used to support traditional knowledge systems at one point. That's why he thought that I should listen to the presentations and then give him feedback, because we are partners in a way, though we are not in this discussion. Thank you for now.
Thank you so much, Eric, and I'm really glad that you unfortunately has been part of this presentation, but it is ref knowing, and you can just go ahead and contribute and share your knowledge or questions or concerns in regard to this presentation, as much as you are also representing Dr. Muyungi. So please feel free to contribute anything.
You see, I was in another activity, so I've just he has just took me up to listen so that I can give him feedback. So whatever I may contribute will be contrary to his keynote speaker and speech, but rather I may share my own experience, because at one point I said that we supported the traditional knowledge systems in Tanzania.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
So whenever you're ready to share your experience, please, we would love to hear that. But I'm dropping this to the table as well. But I'm seeing that Saitoti, you have a hand, so please go ahead and speak.
Thank you, Chancellor. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good. Thank you very much. Porokwa has actually raised such a very important point that we need actually to enhance clearly the collaboration between indigenous people and the meteorological department, that is the scientist. And this can actually be done by the readiness of these scientists themselves. As we mentioned, that we had a dialogue, actually, that the dialogue itself was bringing the scientists together with the indigenous community and reading from one another, sharing experience on how they focused the weather. But actually, the problem comes in that the indigenous knowledge has been vested much to the elderly, and those elderly are going. You know, when I say going, it's like the generation is getting off, and this other left young generations are very poor in examining and reading the weather forecasting pattern as used by the other indigenous traditional leaders as they used to. But then what we can do here is to enhance UNESCO to take part and enhance intensive collaboration between the scientists and the indigenous peoples, including people like Ole Morabu, who has this vested knowledge on clouds. Clouds is one of the very, very important patterns that indigenous communities are using to read their weather, that actually entails their livelihood and how they survive in the next day. So with the enhancement of this collaboration, for example, will actually make this in traditional knowledge not to get lost, as we see, because if this kind of alliances is not enhanced, It means that at the end of the day, the traditional knowledge, though it is recognized, because up to now, that's why the UN system is accepting that indigenous knowledge is very important. But then how this indigenous knowledge is recognized, is respected, and then promoted down on the ground for the indigenous communities themselves to understand and share this important knowledge to the meteorological departments, which are the scientists, because these two systems are focusing on weather and the climate and determining at what point can we adapt it and at what point can we mitigate so that we can be living in this very important world. This is my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saitoti, on that aspect and your contribution. Now, I think this is all a challenge to both of us, to knowing what are we really going to, and in what ways are we really going to make sure that we are out there and we are recognized. I understand there is not one approach, but Musa said it is important not only to be connected with our scientists, but the media, policymakers, you know, we all have a part and a thing to contribute towards making the whole community recognized, the indigenous knowledge and the traditional systems being recognized. So I'm going to ask for your opinion, and then Gideon, what do you have to say on this? And what do you think? Can we move on as an approach?
Commit against Chancellor?
Yeah, in regarding to enhancing the collaboration towards making recognition of indigenous peoples, because if the knowledge will be useless if there is no recognition. And then what do you think can be a good approach onto making sure institutions are connected, multilateral institutions are connected, multinational institutions are connected with this community, with the custodians of local indigenous knowledge? What could be a way out towards having a union for saving the Mother Earth?
Yeah, well, thank you, Chancellor, and I really concur and with what my colleagues Edward and Saitoti have talked about, how to enhance the knowledge of indigenous people and its recognitions. And I think the only way we can do is through the policy engagement that our policies are recognition of indigenous people knowledge, because the UN system has already talked about how to incorporate indigenous people on UN, UN processes. Talks about, for example, group. Now come to GCF, also have a policy on indigenous people and focusing on knowledge of indigenous people. But now we need to come to the national level, is where we are missing a link on indigenous people issues within our policies and strategies. So having these networks and organizations and some of the decision makers like Miyungi, our GCF board member, but also one of the, a prominent person on when it comes to climate change issues in our country. This is a way we can enhance the indigenous people knowledge, indigenous people issues to be, to be in the front, be a front issues to incorporate our issues in our documents, in our policies, in our strategies, and down to the local level authority. So I think that's the best way we can do, collaborations of what already been signed, like peace agreements. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, you went missing without, but yeah, we can hear you right now.
Yes, so that is the way we can do, strengthen our collaborations between the governments, the indigenous people, like-minded organizations, and other stakeholders to ensure that our knowledge of indigenous people have to be in the strategies and policies.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gideon. I don't want to take many of your time, but before closing, I want to welcome Naila Gileji, and then we'll have a few people chosen to speak on behalf to close the session. But Naila Gileji, I understand and I reckon you have something to say in regard to what we have been discussing currently. Please welcome.
Thank you, Chancellor. I would just like to say that after the whole discussion we have, which was very productive, and thank you for the presentation and even the other contribution that came out after the presentation. It was very productive and the meeting was well productive to everyone. Currently, Pingos Forum, in partnership with UNESCO, will be having a research, trying to research on the indigenous knowledge on the side of women, and we hope we will conduct it soon, just after at the end of this month. We'll start conducting it, and later on we will share, and we will see how this collectiveness will help in continue fighting for the climate change situation that now we are facing, and it will give us more doors to understand different IKs that we have in regard to the gender. Previously, when I presented, I said that most of the documented, we can see it's men-driven. So let's now do it collectively to see each one in the community, our voice is heard, and the idea and the indigenous knowledge anyone has is all documented so that it can be incorporated with others and even go beyond, as Gideon was saying, about them bringing together everyone, every stakeholder to his position, and learn this indigenous knowledge and even adapting it, which is our main agenda at the end. Thank you, everyone, and Chancellor.
Thank you so much, Naila Gileji. I am going to give access to 2 people to talk on behalf, and so that we are going to wind up. Lest, if you have a concern, you can raise your hand, but I'm going to welcome Mzee Nigel, please to speak on behalf now that we are winding, and then later on for a word of closing remarks from our executive director, and then everyone to each.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you to all of the speakers and to Pingos for organizing this event and for this long cooperation between UNESCO and the pastoralist organizations, but particularly Pingos in Tanzania. We're all working towards achieving a sustainable life on this planet, a life based on a human rights approach, based on equity, based on dealing with gender equality, and trying to get the best possible life. At the same time, the way that we have designed the economy globally, the way that energy is produced, has created such a fundamental challenge to our well-being. And in the research, I thought one of the tough things to listen to was how most of the pastoralists said that 30, 40 years ago, they had a good life, and now everybody is under pressure all the time, nonstop, just to survive. And that's not how life should be. So I think there's a great opportunity for connections and cooperation. I think you've seen that the entire UN system has adjusted to recognize that indigenous and local knowledge is an absolutely key element of the sustainable development of our country, of each country, and of our regions and of the global system. It's that transformation of partnership. And I think many of you have been active in the indigenous peoples processes in the UN. You've watched the UN change to be more participatory, but also looking at multiple streams of knowledge, what we call multiple evidence space. And I think the question is, how does that move forward? And I think in Tanzania, you have a highly multicultural society. You have a lot of different knowledge systems there. And there's a great opportunity, and you have leaders like Dr. Muyungi who can help move forward to the uptake at policy level. But as your executive director has said, also that the communities are empowered in the process. And I think that from UNESCO's side, we're looking at this. How can we play a supportive role in this relationship between nature and culture? How can we help support dialogue of science and indigenous knowledge? And I think that you are doing a fantastic job at leading the way of a really breakthrough in new types of research and thinking, which is based on very deep and old knowledge. So we wish you strength in this. We thank you very much, and everybody for putting together an excellent seminar. We hope that people will listen to this. This is really where the work is being done. And UNESCO is looking forward to continuing the partnership. I do want to acknowledge and value the presence of the UNESCO National Commission. UNESCO works through these unique structures in each country, and we would encourage Pingos and the other pastoralists, whether CBO or NGO, to work closely with the National Commission. They are the eyes, ears, and thinking part of UNESCO that creates the policy relationship between the national government and the whole of the UNESCO system. So thank you very much, everybody, and we wish you strength, and we look forward to cooperation and very excited about the new research that's coming forward. I do want to just acknowledge Veronica Gonzalez. She's working as an independent consultant, but Veronica was a lead consultant on this work, and she's just put her heart and soul into producing some very good results. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Asante sana mzee Nigel. Tafadhali mkurugenzi Edward Porokwa, karibu na kwa upande wako tusikie.
Asante sana. It has been a pleasure to have all of you to discuss this very important issue. And I'm really happy with the commitment that Nigel is just making in relation to collaborating with different partners to the local level to try to improve dialogue between those people that play part in issues of indigenous knowledge, and particularly indigenous communities, civil society, and the government. So I really acknowledge your commitment, and I'm really happy that this discussion will go on. But also, very importantly, I appreciate the attendance of our colleague, Dr. Muyungi. He has been very useful, very supportive in all this process, and we will continue to use this vast knowledge on issues of climate change and how to engage with government in all these strategies that really help the community, because as we all agree that the life in the community have changed, and change is playing a very big part in the shape of government policies, in shape of government strategies. And if we are left unattended in these processes, definitely many of the people will continue to be marginalized. So thank you very much for this, and I hope we will keep you coming together to discuss all these issues and see how we can work together to improve the situation of our people. Asante sana.
Asanteni sana watu wote kwa ushiriki wenu. Thank you so much for your participation. And I'm informed that Dr. Muyungi is back. So please, I would love to hear him speak something for us as we are winding up this process. Tafadhali Daktari, karibu. You were represented by Eric. And so now that you are back, we would love to see you once more.
Asante sana. I brought a representative without your permission.
That was awesome,
but
by
for
the
the good
way.
reason.
Yes, exactly.
I just wanted to show you that indeed we are working very close with our colleague, the Nation Commission for UNESCO. And I'm glad that Nigel is also appreciating this sort of collaboration. And I think, as he indicated, it's very good, all of you, to also touch base with National Commission offices for UNESCO, so that you create that link, that collaborative link. As Miguel said, the Commission is our eye to the UNESCO, and I think in such occasions, I always call on them to participate so that they can also get the sense of what is going on in other areas. So once again, let me thank you very much, and for accepting my uncalled invitation to bring in Eric. And I'm glad that it has been a useful move. And thank you sincerely. I'll be with you all the time. As you said, I've been with you all the time, and I'll continue working closely together with every one of you so that we can move this agenda beyond where it is today. Thank you indeed.
Asante sana Daktari. I also asked Eric to share his contacts, which he has done, and I'm gladly we are going to connect right away and see how we can foster for the advancement of indigenous knowledge and recognition of indigenous peoples for the betterment of our nations. Asanteni sana watu wote. Thank you for your time and patience. I know we have moved way beyond the expected time, but I think this is for the greater good. And I wish you well. Have a good day and bonne journée. Asanteni.
Asante. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Kwaheri.
Safi. Jase.
Yes, Musa.
Mbona hujaniambia mapema hii kitu?
Bado watu hawajaondoka, kwa hiyo subirini.